Hey, what's going on, guys? It's your sweet boy, Amy, back at it once again. My voice is pretty much back now, which is really cool. Today we are doing some frequently asked questions about the KTM RC390. As you can see here, because I don't have an X mount, I just kind of taped the questions onto the gas tank. Don't worry, this is safe, delicate paint tape, so it's not going to scuff up the gas tank or anything like that. I polled the folks on my Patreon and on the Discord server about what questions they had about this bike and what they wanted to know about it. If you want to participate in that kind of stuff and learn how you can win this motorcycle for free, you can hit up the link in the description below and get started and learn all about that. This is a sweet peach of a little bike, and they had a couple questions for me, so let's go over these while we cruise around this neighborhood street here. Of course, we get a nice little startup. It's not as aggressive as a startup as our FC09 or FC07, but still works for us. So let's get going. So our first question that we have is, what's the top speed? I don't really know. I think it's probably going to be about 115 or 120 if I had to guess, because I remember I topped out my little R3 and it was only about 115 miles per hour. So I assume this bike is the same, because we're not at a track and this bike is still being broken in. I can't test the top speed, but I would guess it's about 115 to 120 miles per hour. This bike's not really about its top speed, so it's our next question here. When do you want to shoot yourself rather than to keep riding? I think that question's about, you know, how the back is and how the ergonomics comfortable are. I think it really depends on the type of person you are. I could personally ride this bike for about 2 hours before I start getting a little fatigued with it. But, you know, it really depends on the type of rider you're on, the type of bikes you're used to. If you're used to cruisers and very upright kind of, you know, standard bikes, you might find this bike to be a little uncomfortable after a while. But overall, it's really not a bad place to be for a long time, man. But then again, I'm 26 and pretty spry, so it's not a big deal. God, you really just want to ride this bike hard. Take a look at our next question here. How would it fit a 6'3" guy? I'm about 6 foot. With my boots on, I'm like 6'1", and to me it fits pretty well. It's definitely a compact package, but it's a small bike, so you don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. But I think it would fit you pretty well. Boy, this bike looks cool going down the road, man. Let's take a look at our next question here. What's it like going from the naked FC07 to the more sporty KTM? The first thing you notice is the lack of torque, right? The FC07 just really rips, got tons of torque. This bike is really not going to get away from you, but it's a completely different experience, to be honest. Like this bike, as you can tell here, like if you're just cruising down the street, we're going about 50 kph, which is like 30 miles per hour maybe. It just like, it flicks so quickly, man. This thing, it just is razor sharp, and you really just want to ride it in a sporty environment. Whereas the FZ, because the suspension's not nearly as compliant or as nice as this KTM, it really leaves a lot to be desired. I'm going to do a quick little U-turn here. So yeah, I would say that's the main difference, is just like, I can't even begin to tell you how different of a riding experience this is versus the FC07, which is funny because they're both billed as beginner bikes, but to be honest, this thing versus the FC07 is a more approachable beginner bike, but it's worse as a beginner bike for different reasons, in that the ergonomics are much more committed. It's much more kind of sporty and taxing to ride. But if you want to do that, you know, it's definitely a great place to be. I mean, just look at the way this thing, like it's actually kind of crazy how lightweight and fun it is to ride. This next question says, is it powerful enough to rip Dank-Nooners pretty easily? I'm not good enough to rip Dank-Nooners, but because it's a single cylinder, I think it has plenty of torque in first gear to crack a nice Nooner on it. I'm sure you could wheelie this thing. I have no doubt. I bet it'd be really easy to do a first gear kind of wheelie on it, maybe a clutch up, but I'm not good enough to do it. I've definitely seen guys doing wheelies on these bikes. I'll try to maybe include a clip of it here or something, because I know it's definitely possible. So, you know, it's interesting because this is a single cylinder bike. This has a lot more poke than you might expect, especially here in the mid-range. Like, you just kind of, it's a fun little bike, man. It's way more torquey and fun than my R3, I'll tell you that right now. it just feels so much more sporty. Take a look at our next question here. It says, really though, how stiff is the clutch? And it's nice that we're doing some stop and go stuff in traffic right here, because it actually is quite a easy clutch to work and operate, honestly. I find that it's extremely easy to do the pull on it. So the clutch is not stiff at all, actually. Being that it's a little 373cc single sill, you know, it's not going to have some stiff clutch to work. So really not bad. It says, real question though, how did the ergos compare to an actual super sport? And so I think this is a really interesting question, because this motorcycle actually compares very, very well to an actual super sport. For those guys that don't know, the biggest difference between something like a Ninja 300 and a Ninja 636, right, is, of course, there's power way more in the 636, right? It's got triple the horsepower. But the big difference, though, is that, you know, it's going to have an ergonomics package that's incredibly more aggressive. The Ninja 300 sits way, like, more comfortable, streetable type of thing, versus the 636, which is a super sport motorcycle, is way more aggressive, you know. It's going to really seat you, like, you know, with your butt way up in the air, your foot pegs really high up. And this thing, it feels like a proper super sport motorcycle. It's pretty close to the ergonomics that you would find in an actual sport bike. And I'll include a little picture in here of like the rider triangle of this bike versus other bikes that are similar. So I'll include that right here, because for me personally, I just rode a 636 at the track in Jerez, and I really found that it's a pretty comfortable ergonomics package, honestly. All right, what else we got here? It says, is it actually new rider friendly? The power definitely is. Like, this is not going to scare any new rider, I don't think. Like, it's a quick little bike, but it's definitely not going to scare you. I think the thing that's going to really turn you off is it's just how stiff it is and how committed the ergonomics are. Like, this is a proper sport bike, and if you're not really ready for that, you might be a little shaken off from it. And to be honest, bikes like this with this kind of ergonomics package are a lot more difficult to ride than bikes that have a more upright standing position, especially for low speed parking lot kind of stuff. You might find that as a new rider, you kind of get a little chopped up whenever you're you know, riding one of these bikes, especially because of the way it's so committed. So I would say yes and no. Is it beginner rider friendly? But then again, man, like, I think we get a little too kind of like up in the air about like what is or is not beginner rider friendly. Like, anything, you know, within reason. Like, if you're looking at like a 650 versus an FZ07 versus an R3 versus an RC390, you can ride all of those bikes as a beginner bike. But I mean, truly what it comes down to is your personal preference and what you want out of a motorcycle. Fun little bike, man. How vibey is it at different speeds, or is it smooth? So that's a really interesting one, because at low speeds it is quite vibey. I'll show you guys up here, hopefully if I can. I'll show you at the stop sign. As you can tell, it kind of just thumps away, and if you notice here, this is quite vibey, you know. But once you get up to speed, this is really smooth, honestly, smoother than you'd expect. And it works really well. So yeah, overall, I think it's definitely a vibey engine, right? Because it is a single cylinder, but it's really not as bad as you would expect. This person asks, how about the dash? Is it any good? Can you read it during the day? You can definitely read it during the day. I can read this pretty well, but if the sun catches it, it's definitely a little bit tougher to read. It's fun, man. Yeah, I've found that in cases where you're riding it along and you know, you get a glimpse of the sun or something, or it kind of catches it in the wrong direction, it is pretty tough to read. So I would keep an eye on that. But overall, it's definitely an easy dash to read. You can really see all the information you need to see. Let's look at our next question. It says, also, what's the first thing you change? I would definitely change the tail tidy. I love doing that on every motorcycle I own. I definitely don't like having a huge tail section on there. So I think it'd be really important for me personally to change the fender eliminator on it, or get that fender eliminated. One thing I love is how crisp the downshifts feel on this bike. Like, it's so easy to just pop a nice downshift on it, man. Some bikes are kind of tough. Like the ZX-10 is just like a tough bike to downshift for some reason. All right, what next question? How is the fit and finish of the bike compared to the Japanese cousins? Is it well thought out or just pieced together? Honestly, fit and finish is pretty amazing on this motorcycle. For the kind of class that it's in and the sort of bike that it is, right around $5,000 out the door that I bought it, I'm pleasantly surprised. It definitely feels higher spec than something like an R3 or Ninja 300. I haven't ridden the new generations of those, like the 400 or the newly revised R3, but at the same time, I can't imagine that they changed it too much. I know the R3 has a new dash or whatever, but it definitely feels more premium than those other bikes. It's the little things, right? Like the adjustable levers and the quality of the grips. Those are all little things that add up to a really positive experience for the motorcycle. It definitely makes it feel more high-end than it actually is. Like stuff like the backlick switches as well. I think that's such a cool feature on this bike, and something you really don't see a lot of, honestly. Would it be good for a daily rider? I think so, as long as you're willing to put up with the sportiness of it. If you don't mind having a bike that oh boy, someone's... As long as you don't mind having a bike that's, you know, pretty sporty, I think it's a great daily rider kind of bike. Personally, for me, I prefer something with a little more torque for the street and something more comfortable. I think the XZ07 makes a way better, like, daily bike than something like this, but it also depends on where you live. Like, for me here in Texas, living in a place that, you know, is a little more flat, a little more straight, you want a bike that's a little more comfortable, a little more torque, but overall, I can't really complain. I think this bike would make a really good daily bike as well. I mean, it's definitely not something like an R1 or whatever. All right, what's the next question on our list here? How does it handle rough roads? Yeah, so one of the things you need to know about the KTM RC390 is how compliant but stiff the suspension is from factory. And as you can tell, much like the other bikes in this segment, it doesn't have adjustable rebound or compression. All you can do is adjust the preload in the rear for the spring. But to be honest, man, like, you really don't need much more than that for the street. I think guys sometimes get bogged up in the fact it's like, oh, I gotta get you know, my suspension dialed in for the street. It's like, buddy, like you don't need to adjust your rebound and compression for the street. I'm sorry, like, you just really don't. And so I think that's a little bit silly. But yeah, I think for rough roads and kind of everyday riding, it's definitely manageable. Like, as you can tell here, it's definitely stiffer than the FZ07. Like, you ride this thing around and you really feel like it's a much stiffer, much sportier experience. It does beat up your back a little bit, but that's okay. That's part of the fun in it, right? Did a little launch there. What's it like riding a bike that has enough orange to be legally considered safe hunting apparel? That's hilarious. Yeah, this bike gets so much attention, man. Like, I've literally, like, I've owned it for a single whole day, and at gas stations I've already had people come and be like, what the hell is that thing? At stoplights, people are like, what is that bike? It gets tons of attention, man. And then, because people are really silly, you'll be like, oh, it's an RC390, it's a KTM. They don't know what a KTM is. They hear 390 and they're like, oh, it's a little bike. Like, this is a bike for motorcyclists, right? Like, if you know about motorcycles, you will know about this bike and you'll be hyped that someone has one. But if you're just like some normie at a traffic light, you're just gonna be like, oh, what is that there thing? What is that there little orange bike you got there, boy? Like, they're not gonna know, you know. So to me, that's kind of cool because it adds the flavor of exclusivity and just, like, you know, kind of boutiqueness that this bike has, because you really don't see a lot of these, man. Like, I've never seen one personally. The only one I've seen was the one that I got to test ride that a friend of mine owned a few years back. That was the only one I've ever seen, and that's what kind of got me bitten on the bug of these bikes, because they are really, really cool. Look at these downshifts, though. You ready? You can do them like rapid fire. Yeah, you can see here we're idling. The mirrors are definitely shaking, so it is a vibey engine. All right, let's see here. Does the single front brake feel underpowered? Actually, no. The single front brake feels extremely powerful on this bike. I'm actually really surprised by it. I think a lot of guys, again, get into the motor, they need to have, like, you know, dual discs at the front to be, you know, competitive at the track and all that. But man, you can brake the ever-loving crap out of this bike, man. I've already been in situations where I was just kind of testing the brakes, and you can really just stomp on the brakes, man, like really, really aggressively, and it doesn't really matter. It's got a lot of feel and a lot of feedback for being a single disc, so it works very well. Like here, I'll try to show you guys a little bit. There's not much traffic behind me, so I can kind of just stomp on the brakes a little bit. Like, see, it's got tons of bite, man. Like, you really can out-brake yourself with this thing. Like, it stops really, really aggressively. What's our next question here? How does the seat feel? I've sat on a few of these, and I always imagine the seat would be brooder for longer rides. The seat's pretty tough, I'm not gonna lie. It does feel like a piece of plywood. But, I mean, that's kind of the point of it, right? Because it's a little race bike, you're supposed to be off the seat, you know, constantly. Your feet's on the pegs, you know, so you're not really gonna be using it very much. But for street riding, yeah, it is kind of tough. It's pretty brutal. I kind of akin it to having, like, you know, a carbon fiber bucket seat in a car or something with like minimal padding. You're just like, oof, this is pretty tough for a long stint. But in this application, it makes a lot of sense. I just really appreciate how it's like, it's a proper sport bike, man. This thing doesn't feel like a pretender bike. This is a proper sport bike. It just happens to be a smaller CC, you know? And then the last question is, who would win? 100 duck-sized RC390s or 1 duck-sized... No, hold on. 100 duck-sized RC390s or 1 RC390-sized duck. And I gotta tell you, man, if there was a duck that was the size of an RC390, I would be very afraid of it, and I would not mess with it. So I'm gonna give it to the RC390-sized duck on that one, because 100 little baby bikes is pretty silly to me. So that's gonna wrap up today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed some of these questions that my patrons provided about the bike. Again, if you guys don't know, this is our giveaway bike, so if you want to learn how you can get started to win it, you know, go to our Patreon, link below, and find out. You can join our Discord server and, you know, get involved with cool stuff like this and ask questions about the bike and hang out with me. But yeah, that's about it. I'll catch you guys next time. See you later.